far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny. Woman, woman.
As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions toward decolonization. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor our dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. By Kay Johnson. Welcome to 100 ABC Fireside Chats. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold project initiated by co-authors and co-founders, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and Donna Jones Simmons. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as our website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. In addition to our fireside chats on topics that matter to our communities, such as education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, trade union, and so much more, we offer biennial book launching galas and biannual symposiums. The co-authors and co-founders would like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for attending today's fireside chat. We know that you will find these sessions educational and inspirational. So sit back, relax, and hear from our brilliant and talented honorees. Welcome to Season 4 of the 100 ABC Women Fireside Chats. What began as a simple idea, a platform to educate and engage a community on topics that matter, has now grown into a movement. Initially, we tested the waters to gauge interest, and today we proudly launch our 4th season with 2 additional episodes to be added this year. This is in addition to the 100 plus fireside chats delivered over seasons 1 through 3. This achievement is by no means a small feat. It truly takes a village, a dedicated team of technical support specialists, administrators, schedulers, moderators, panelists, and sponsors to bring these fireside chats to life. On behalf of 100 ABC Women and its co-authors and co-founders, Dame Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine and Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and myself. We extend our deepest gratitude to everyone who has contributed to making this program a success. It is difficult to fully express just how much these discussions mean, not only to us, but to the community we serve. We sincerely hope you will tune in to our upcoming episodes. Each session promises to offer fresh insights, knowledge, and perspectives. Kicking off Season 4, Episode 1, Black History Education Curriculum. When we learned that a Black History Education curriculum was being developed, we knew that we had to get involved. Our goal simply was crucial: to ensure that our voices were heard. To achieve this, we convened a national panel to discuss what should be included in the curriculum so that it would be truly inclusive and benefit all Canadians. Our panelists spoke passionately and thoughtfully, and the insights culminated in a comprehensive report with key recommendations, which was submitted to the Minister of Education in December 2024. We are now awaiting a response. As we launch Season 4, we invite you to join us in this critical conversation, a follow-up discussion from our 2024 symposium, where we explore the next steps and the impact of our advocacy efforts. Thank you for being part of this journey. We look forward to an engaging and enlightening Season 4. Thank you.
And Donna, we would like for you to give our viewers an update as to where we are, where we started, and where we have left off before we start to join in on our conversation, and then I will introduce our guests.
As I indicated, we sent a report to the minister with various recommendations. Some of the recommendations included things that we want to be part of this conversation. We want to make sure that it is inclusive. We want to make sure that the people who have contributed significantly to the history of this country are included. So we are just awaiting a response. Basically, that's where we're at. And I'm hoping that with a few nudges that we will hear from the minister soon.
All right, so very good. And before we go forward, hello everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule as always. And I have two great women here to join the conversation. So I have Sarah Onango, who's with us, and Elise Hardin-Davis. And I'm going to let the ladies introduce themselves and tell you a bit, and then we will jump into our questions and our dialogue. So Sarah, I'll lead off with you.
Bonjour tout le monde. Je m'appelle Sarah Onyango. I am coming to you from the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. I started in French because that is our language here in La Belle Province du Québec. I am the Public Relations, Media, and Community Outreach Coordinator for Black History Ottawa, and it's in that capacity that I'll be speaking today. I'm also a community radio and television host and an advocate and promoter of all things African, Caribbean, and Black in our nation's capital.
Very good. And the woman that really should have no introductions, but of course, Miss Elise Hardin-Davis.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am titled an African Canadian Heritage Consultant. What that means is I wear many hats and have the opportunity to involve in many, many processes. I have worked with education internationally for over 50 years. One of my most prideful processes was the developing of a Black curriculum for the Greater Essex County District School Board back in the 1990s, which unfortunately has stayed in draft form until 2 months ago. So we are moving forward, but that's exactly what this afternoon's chat is about. How are we moving forward, and how long does it take when you have all of the materials handed to you. And people like Sarah and Donna and Yvette and myself and others who are professional and knowledgeable, we want to see things happen. We're worried that with this change in government, the whole process that's been put in place to do something about the Black curriculum will just fade into the background. I was at the UN as a delegate in December. There was much discussion about history and education and putting Black history in its proper perspective. We all know without it, all of history is incomplete. And we have so many champions that we know of who should be known globally.
So on that role for a second, let me jump back over then. So Sarah, give me a bit as to what's the role of the Black history in Ottawa, and then I will come to Elise with the role that's played here, and then I'll segue a bit back to the ministry and where we're at. So what's the role of Black history in Ottawa, Sarah?
Black History Ottawa has existed since 1986. It was actually created by a group of West Indian community associations to do this work that Elise and others have been doing in terms of educating the public in the Ottawa area about the historic presence of Black people and their contributions to building the city of Ottawa, the National Capital Region, into what it is today. So Black History Ottawa, what we do is, of course, there's, the observance of Black History Month every February. We are the organization that coordinates the City of Ottawa's citywide launch. I know OBHS does it in Toronto, so we have sort of a similar role. But we also are a resource for organizations, companies, government institutions, and school boards for providing either presentations or directing all of these entities to other resources and persons like Elise, who would be knowledgeable enough to share the information that the different audiences need in order to gain a better appreciation of the historic presence of Black people in Canada, because Black History Ottawa believes, like Elise just said, that Black history is Canadian history, and you cannot talk about Canada's history without referencing the fact that in the 1600s, there were already Black people here, etc. So our role really is to communicate and promote that. And we also liaise with media, and we check them to make sure that not just during February, but throughout the year, that they are presenting, an adequate and balanced portrayal of what Black realities and Black contributions are.
Very good. And then Elise, you have coined the Black thread in the Canadian tapestry from when we were with the North American Black Historical Museum. So give us, though, we know you're from Southwestern Ontario perspective of the Windsor area, Amherstburg and that. So tell us, though, with regards to the Black study programs and where they have sprung forward and that information and knowledge that where we're going to lead to.
Thanks, Yvette. We have just developed an anti-Black racism process to be taught in our public school system. And because of that, our draft program for Black studies has been elevated. You can't teach anti-racism if you don't have any history. So that's a real plus. It's been a long time coming. I've been teaching Black studies at St. Clair College in Windsor, Ontario since 1993. It was the first acknowledged Black studies program for post-secondary education. But the problem is that these are, I'm going to say, side dishes. They're not given the focus and prominence they should be in the education system. Speaking about what Sarah was saying, Blacks in Canada since the 1600s, Samuel de Champlain has been given credit for helping to produce Canada, so to speak. But without Matthew da Costa and his linguistic skills that made it possible for Champlain to parlay with the Micmac, there might not be a Canada. How important an issue is that?
Let me jump in here. So we're just going to start. So people have a little bit of a background and understanding that the two ladies that are on your screen right now are versed in depth with regards to their knowledge and understanding. So currently now we have the Honorable Jill Dunlop, who is now the Minister of Education at the time in which this conversation about Black curriculum was under Lecce. So time has gone by in the sense as to where we are. So we have a few, questions that still need to be answered. The transparency is key when you're talking about anti-racism and where the work needs to be done, and understanding who are the individuals and who is at the table is very important. So currently we do not know who has been selected to this committee, even if a committee has been struck. That has to be put into the public domain so that people understand it as to the sense of representation, right? So for you, Sarah, what does representation going to look like or mean to you as to who comes to this table for this discussion of writing? And I understand, and we have to preface too, not everyone at the table will be those who can write, right? Because we know those who are the people who can be the writers of documents and those who can be the inputters of the knowledge, right? The vessels to which we pour from. So what does representation, what would it look like from your perspective?
Well, representation in terms of different kinds of knowledge. I remember at the symposium, we had people that have that artistic background that brought that knowledge to our discussion. There are also people who are versed in the way Black communities pass down their stories and histories and experiences. And we are very much in the oral tradition. It's interesting you're talking about writing when diversity should also include, the orality of Black history and experiences as well. I'm French speaking, so of course I would like to see a good representation of Black Francophone history, realities, etc. As it stands, from what I've seen, there are not many Francophone Black academics in Ontario that do this Canadian Black history. I know there's Amadou Ba, I think he's over in Sudbury or something like that. But we need people like him who can bring in the French element, because increasingly, when we look at immigration, the biggest wave currently is these Francophone Blacks from the Great Lakes, etc. So it's very important that someone with a knowledge of their presence in Canada is at the table. Obviously, there has to be sort of that gender balance so that there is the male perspective, the female perspective, because depending on your gender, you don't necessarily have the same interpretation of different events, even though objectively an event is an event. Yeah, but the way it was lived by women and the way it was lived by men or people who don't fall into either of those gender categories, that sort of thing. Generationally as well, it'd be good to have, a diversity of age categories, and most of all, a diversity of perspectives representing the different waves of immigration, because you have someone like Elise, who's what, seventh generation Canadian, but then you have the people who are West Indian who came in the 60s, 70s, 80s, etc. So those are some of the things I would like to see in terms of representation in that committee.
And at least what's the representation look like for you?
Well, I have an issue with picking one or two people and just working them to death. And I happen to be one of those people. I certainly want to stay involved, but I want to see other professionals, and there are so many who are just overlooked or not known about. We've got 100 accomplished Black Canadian women, more than 100 women across this country who could be on these panels who are not. Additionally, when a person is picked to sit in the education chair through the government, they should be given some background knowledge so that they understand what we are speaking about when we say we are not included appropriately. And as Sarah was saying, West Indians' first wave was in the 1920s. There's a rich history for all of our African descent people who are not being dealt with. You know, I sat on a Queen's commissioned committee in the 1990s again, when Harris was in power. And we put a curriculum together that was to be used across the province, which could be adapted across the country, and it's shelved somewhere. There are vast pockets of knowledge that are at hand that I would really like to see resurrected and used. You know, we have a systemic problem. For the Eurocentric community, we have all of these things in place where they have committees with elders and men and women and people from different backgrounds across Europe. It's no different. It isn't a process that isn't in place. It's just that when it comes to Black studies or Black history, it seems to be a mystery as to how to do this.
And that becomes the aspect of saying, so, okay, is all of this performative? Right. So when we think about what is put forward with the governments, no matter who's in place, so the performative framework of the announcements, the performative aspect of there's only specific organizations who are selected to receive funding, right? And then when we look at the parts about the funding where funds aren't even distributed, the rigid criteria that are even put forward. So to segue in a way, okay, so let's say a committee is struck. Notedly by what you guys have just put forward, that there's representation from across Canada, representation with regards to gender parity, representation regarding to the diverse nuanced frameworks of individuals from the different diasporas that they represent within the Black context, right? So that is struck. So the question becomes, okay, with this curriculum being developed, what's the onus then that we want the ministry to put on then school boards? Because currently, do we want it to be a thou shalt? So therefore, there is no going around and circumventing. Or should it be where school boards should be able to pick and choose?
It should be imposed. I'm sorry. It's like enough. Okay. Really enough, because Black History Ottawa starting in December, we get panicked emails from teachers who are anxious about the fact that their particular school or their school board hasn't really put anything in place for Black History Month. And I want to do something for my class, not my school, my class. And so, what do you suggest? Blah, 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 And my question is always, what do you mean your school hasn't planned anything? What do you mean your principal isn't necessarily, committed to making sure that, you have either a budget or, resources that could help you organize something, etc. It needs to be, imposed, because other things are imposed, right? And for whatever reason, when it comes to us, well, actually, not for whatever reason, we know exactly why. It's a power dynamic thing, definitely a power dynamic thing, because if you give our experiences in history and culture space in a curriculum, you're validating us. Oh my goodness. No. We can't have that. So the ministry really does need to impose, and parents need to support, and teachers need to support as well. You have to get buy-in from everyone. Just because you impose it doesn't mean it's going to be executed in a way that is beneficial to the students and to the educators.
I agree with Sarah. It should be imposed. My feeling on that is, as with the Francophone culture, this is a bilingual country. French is to be included. Well, in my remembrance as an historian, 4 cultures built this country: the British, the French, the Indigenous, and the Africans. Canada is formulated on all of these cultures and their contributions. Again, I agree with Sarah. Come January 31st, I am so bombarded with educators, companies who want to do a little something for Black History Month. I appreciate and respect that, but this is a year-long process. We should celebrate the fact that it is Black History Month, but that is the segue to make sure it is included all year long. This committee that has been put forward by the government for education purposes, we'd like to know who is on that committee. We'd like to know what that committee's criteria will actually be. People like myself who are very, very credentialed are overlooked. And I'm not complaining about that. I'm simply making the comment that people who sit on these committees should honestly be people who have the information and are specialists.
Yeah,
And
which is it's important, because in that way they can actually be critical of what is being omitted or nullified, right? As to what is then being put forward. And just to touch on the educational space, and Sarah, to the point that we make. So as a teacher, what is important for everyone to understand, so schools get a budget that is divided up from the larger pocket of what's there, right? So depending on whom sits in the seat as your administrator, whether it's a single administrator school or one to which there's a VP that's assigned, working with their staff, they're supposed to set out what is their goals for the year. And you will note, for the most part, equity is not a priority, even though equity has a prong, that's laid out. Equity is not a priority, or the equity that is championed is not Black history knowledge or equity, right? And as we see within there's Indigenous studies, and Black studies or African heritage studies should be what is prioritized. And so, Sarah, for most teachers have the domain of their classroom, right? So they have their little pocket of money that you may have of $300 or whichever. Most teachers, if they're Black, will be coming out of their own pocket when they call upon their people or outreach to do something, and they say their class, because that's what they have the domain over. Because what we see that has been happening is you have administrators and school boards that are actually asking you and telling you that you cannot bring people in that in any way are the activists or the advocates or people speaking and reticently trying to address issues of real anti-Black racism, There's a real drawback even to what is very funny. So I'll say to you even, the conversation, because we know that several educators and boards, there's the issue of the N-word that's being utilized, and going forward, that you have even principals now that have gone to, well, you know, speaking about using the term Afro or African, or Negro, books that have the word Negro in it, we don't really want to touch on that. And that's where it lends to the ignorance. Right. So the ignorance of not understanding and knowing the frameworks, as if you're talking about anywhere within that earlier previous time period, Negro is the terminology that was utilized. Like, again, context matters. And we have moved to an aspect here where you have white fragility, you have colonial structures that are seeping their way in to try to dismantle. And those who aren't trying to dismantle are just, again, because of their ignorance, they don't even know how to receive or understand that conversation, right? So in the educational space, it's very problematic, because we have people, again, in leadership that don't have the capacity nor the anti-racist lens or intellect to advance conversations and bring things forward within the spaces. Right. So it becomes very problematic, again, where I say about the performativeness of what is transpiring, that within this curriculum, to what you both have just agreed upon, it has to be an edict that, yes, here is whatever document we are creating, right? That this is whatever our curriculum document we're going to utilize, and this must be taught and strung out, because as we know, Black history and input covers the whole swath. So whether we're talking about academics, we're talking about the arts, we're talking about the sciences, we're talking about mathematics, right? And it just keeps on going. So my question back to you guys then, in the sense of, okay, yes, it must be a thou shalt, like this is what we're utilizing. And we now we've been saying this for years, not just us, but everyone. Black history is not just concentrated to 1 month. However, we do want to make sure that we do highlight Black history, because in the case scenario for TDSB, I'm not sure about the other boards, but for TDSB, they have now layered Asian Heritage Month into Black History Month, right? Which becomes problematic now, because even though we know that February has been the 1 month that has been designated specifically for Black history because of the nullification and the omittance of it, it now is celebrating with Asian Heritage Month. There's a Chinese Heritage, which I got to make sure I get my right one there, right? Which becomes now this. So what money is to be spent? Who are we spending money on? Who has a priority? Even though we know June already is established with respect for the other celebration. So one culture and heritage has 2 months of celebration. The other, only that is historically 1, is now conflicting, right? So the priority has to be set still, though, that February, for what it was by Carter G. Woodson, for why we celebrate, must ensure that we still magnify. So Sarah, I see your facial.
Yeah, I have a question as to why they've rolled Asian into Black history. Can you explain? And I'm sure I'm
that
not the only
was
person
what we
that's
brought at the
puzzled.
board. So those are the trustees. We had a trustee that said that the demographics of their writing had requested. It was very heated conversations at the board when this had taken place a few years ago. But that's where it was, the sense that the anti-Black racism that was being exhibited, for this to be acknowledged and implemented. But again, when you have a board of white trustees, you had a few racialized individuals. There was one Black trustee that was around the table. But at that aspect, it just gets overvoted, right? Because they don't care. To your point, Black history is their history. They don't care about it. They don't know about it. So it's a matter of, then again, you also have people that go, well, let's just celebrate everybody, right? Because that becomes the answer. We're celebrating everybody, right?
Well,
No,
in
you're not.
terms of-
Because when you do that, you're not celebrating me. You've
in
just
the Essex
diminished my
County
capacity,
area,
my relevance, right?
in the Essex County area, we had the same situation with Asian history being brought into Black History Month. And I was one of the voices that respectfully made sure that Black History Month was Black History Month. Because as you said, Yvette, Asian History Month or Asian History Week is celebrated in June. It is a question of, as you said, who's at the table, who has adequate knowledge that Black History Month can be filled, and then some, with Black history, and who simply doesn't have the will to do it, who does not want to go out of their comfort zone, and who does not want to learn more than the old curriculum shows. That's a huge problem. This is what's written. This is what we do. Adding anything else is just not what we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, someone's just said that Asian
It's
history.
May.
Yeah, it is May. I was going to say that.
Sorry,
It's not
June is
June.
Indigenous, yeah, but you get our point. So, but thank you very
Black
much.
History
So we
Month is
appreciate that.
February. That's the point.
Yeah.
That is the
But the fact that it's been brought into the shortest month that has been celebrated, that we know why it's there, again, it's that
Doesn't
aspect of trying
either.
to nullify and to diminish, right? And again, that our voices aren't amplified and that our community is not staying reticent to make sure that they're on top of what is transpiring, right? So again, everyone heard the announcement, everyone is happy, yeah, black curriculum is happening, but to date, we have not seen any action or any progress, and the transparency isn't there. So they have to be far more mindful with regards to what we're doing. So Sarah, for you, what tangibles would you like to see? Right. So aside from the part that we said it'll be a thou shalt, that this is a document that is then created and that the ministry says to every school board, this must be implemented within your whatever, your history, grade 8 or grade 7 history, or it should be throughout all grades. But what tangibles are you looking for?
Content that really puts Black contributions in the context of Canada's evolution, because it's interesting how certain people want to roll Black History Month into Asian Heritage Month, etc., when it's actually Black people and Indigenous people who have really done the bulk of the work and, to advance social justice. Just that field by itself, social justice and racial equity. And it's not because they thought it was a cute thing to do. It's because they very often were the number one victims, whether it was those residential schools, whether it was the enslavement. Yeah, there was slavery in Canada of Black people and Indigenous people. Whether it was the treatment of workers in what is it? The railway workers, the sleeping car porters, whether it was domestics, etc. You are going to find most of the time some Black people, who led the charge for that. So it's very important to make sure that whatever content is presented really amplifies the contributions to areas like social justice, the military, for example. And I'd like to shout out Kathy Grant, who does amazing work with school boards. Recently, she worked with is it the York District School Board, to bring the history into the classrooms and have interactive. That's another thing I'd like to see, that the content be interactive so that, the young people and the kids can sort of, see the videos, interact with the content, look at documents, like actual documents, and develop critical thinking skills with regard to the history they consume, the history that's been there, that's being taught, etc. Content that enables them to ask the questions: who's missing? Why was this omitted, etc., etc. I'm just going to go a little bit off topic because I see a question here that is very close to my heart. Thank you very much, Sylvia Paris Drummond. How can media be leveraged to increase awareness? And in fact, leveraging relationships with media organizations would also bolster the relevance of this Black history education curriculum. Well, Black History Ottawa already does that sort of work with the CBC, CTV, etc. We always make sure that we give them a heads up that February is coming up. This is the stamp, this is the person, the event, or the community that is being featured, and this is why, etc., etc. And here are a list of people that you can call on to come on your shows to give the general public more information about whatever aspect of Canadian Black history that you would like to showcase.
And Elise, your tangibles?
I do. I would like to see more information, perhaps in a process of this week we deal with the trades, this week we deal with sports, this week we deal with the arts. Because our students are not being given the opportunity to see people who look like them, who are successfully dealing with these different areas. I always like to mention my sister, Shelley Harding Smith, who has now passed away, was Canada's first Black female master electrician. The trades are really important. We don't have enough people in electricity and plumbing and carpentry that look like us, that can make a decent living and can show their skill bases. I would also like to see a continuation and an elevation of schools having Zoom meetings with other schools, with the people of knowledge in the different areas, speaking to them so they can find out. In Southwestern Ontario, there was a Black man by the name of Cornelius Henderson who designed the bridge, which is the most used, the busiest international bridge in the world. Things like that are important to know. We can go to the Niagara Falls area and talk about how Blacks actually swam the Niagara River to free themselves, and the Underground Railroad process. You know, the Underground Railroad is focused on, and I respect that, but there's so much more to history than that. We were here long before the Underground Railroad, and the Underground Railroad actually lasted much longer than is reported, and far more hundreds of people were involved. And that is a multicultural process. If we are afraid of educating our children on Black history specifically, we have to help all Canadians understand that it is a multicultural process. And without that Black history, we're losing so much richness for the history of this country. I'd like to see government do more than throw out a few dollars that has to be divided amongst hundreds of groups that we don't know about. We don't know who has the money. We don't know where the money is going. And we don't know what the results of what this money that was given out has done to improve knowledge of Black history.
Very good, because also the other part then too is from the educator side of it, there also needs to be workshops for those who are Black and racialized and Indigenous peoples to make sure that they themselves are fully versed and knowledgeable in the history, right? Because you have a vast amount when you talk about, again, you know, those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat, right? The wrongs that have transgressed, right? Because you have individuals who are sitting or are seated, they're seated in positions of leadership and power, but are doing the colonial masters' work still, right? That are still part of the dismantling, are still part of the ones that are creating harm, whether from lateral violence and other aspects as to what they do. So it's also from the curriculum perspective that we have to make sure that those who are, reflective of what we're talking about are actual participants who know what they're speaking.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then it doesn't even have to be so much about that everybody has to be a master. But to your point that you had said, Elise, and to what you had said, Sarah, is to bring the people who are steeped with the knowledge and stop gatekeeping those people. So I think about the Kika Ojos and others who right now they're trying to gatekeep and try to malign and then defame, and we have to make sure that we speak up and stop the nonsense, right? Because we are then taken away from that knowledge that needs to be shared, that we're appropriately dispensing information, right? So ladies, as we wind down with our minutes and time that we have here, though, so the United Nations has now again on December 16 declared the extension of another 10 years of the decade. And when we're speaking of, again, staying within the topic of what we're looking at, like education is vast, right? Because we're talking from the elementary, the secondary, the tertiary, when we talk about education. What is it that what do we still need to do? So we're being given now another 10 years because COVID came into effect. We've had other things that kind of took away from where the priorities and the emphasis needs to be. So in the aspects of education, what do we still need to do? So Elise, let's start with you, and I'll go to Sarah, and we'll give you guys like a good 4 minutes each type of thing. But
Thank you.
what's still required?
Well, I'd very much like to see African Canadian heroes celebrated. Martin Luther King was a wonderful man, and he was in Canada to learn about how to be passive aggressive with the civil rights process. But there were Canadian heroes who he sought information from. Rosa Parks was in Canada, but Viola Desmond came along before her. We have to put these people forefront. Make sure that African Canadian history is African Canadian history, not North American Black history.
And to, Sarah?
Yeah, it's interesting you should talk about Martin Luther King because Monday is Monday, January 20th, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. My attention is on January 21st, which is Lincoln Alexander Day.
Thank you.
How many of us, black, white, or whatever color Canadians, are even aware that January 21st is the only day named for a Canadian of African descent in the history of this country? How many?
Yeah, very few.
Exactly. So exactly. So to Elisa's point, we do have our heroes, and Lincoln Alexander, who has an entire national day named after him. There needs to be a more concerted effort to make sure that it's not just in the GTA, not just in Hamilton, but in the entire nation of Canada, that on January 21st, schools, institutions, etc., are learning about, honoring, showcasing the contributions of this champion of equity and justice that this man was.
And so
Yes,
is the committee that's being put together going to put that kind of information in some sort of a document that the schools and educators have got to look at and work with for the students? That's what I want to know.
The good thing is there's already a lot of information about Lincoln Alexander. He's even written a book, Go to School, You're a Little Black Boy, etc. There's a documentary that his daughter did, etc. That's another thing. There are resources now in 2025 that when I was in high school in 1980 did not even exist. There has been a concerted effort on the part of the government of Canada whether it's Canada Post, the Royal Canadian Mint, the National Film Board of Canada, etc., to create tangible resources that the general public and schools can use to support
And
their, pardon?
sorry. No, and I just wanted to jump in on that though, right? Because then here comes then the little, because we have so many people that will be like, Lincoln, all right, he got acknowledged, but Lincoln didn't do everything Lincoln was supposed to do, right? So Lincoln was one of their favorites, but it didn't mean that Lincoln did all our parts. But it comes back to the original conversation though. He did his role. He was acknowledged, right? So we
Right.
still got to give people their deference for whatever case, and then we still have the Zanina Condes, we still have, you know what I mean, the Willie
Yeah.
O'Reillys, we have the Donovan Baileys, right? We run the gamut of all the people that still that some people can say they have an angst against or whatever, but to the point, acknowledge what the people have done, right? So it's very important. Like even when I think about Donovan, is the sense that he is the only athlete that has held both, you know, world, Olympic, the 150 meters. Like he's held several of the records one time, one year, and it's still not acknowledged. Like we still look to the other athletes as our people, right? And there's so much. So it's a matter of we just got to make sure that we take people in for the credit where credit is due. Sorry, I see you, Sarah, then Elise.
Yeah. And Yvette, interesting that you should mention Donovan Bailey, because I was at the ceremony where they unveiled at the Canadian Museum of History, where they unveiled that historic, the singlet, the cleats from, and part of the ribbon from his medal from the 1996 Atlanta Olympics. I mean, there are these little initiatives left and right. We need to also, you know, be cognizant of those, and also put forward the people we feel are overlooked, and not be content to just sit back and, well, I sent it in and they didn't accept it. No, push it. Get your, you know, get the fan club of the person, push, keep making the case, and stating, you know, why it's important that this trailblazer or that contributor you know, needs that national or provincial acknowledgement. You talked about the extension of the UN Decade for Peoples of African Descent. Black History Ottawa, we are still trying to remind people that it's even happening. There are so many people in our own community who are not aware that the UN Decade for Peoples of African Descent is happening. So all of us, the organizations, activists, etc., also need to find a way to elevate the awareness of the decade and those three pillars: recognition, justice, and what's the third one? Recognition, justice, and development.
And
Yeah.
can I
Elise, go ahead.
please state, people of African descent means people of African origins globally.
Yes.
Speaking about Donovan Bailey, speaking about Lincoln Alexander, they are multi-African descent because their parents or they themselves have come from the West Indies, but they're African Canadian. That is where these contributions have been made and should be respected. I myself am, I gotta say, wholly Canadian because we were here before Canada was Canada. But that doesn't mean I'm different from the Donovan Baileys and the Lincoln Alexanders. We are all African Canadian contributors historically. And our history spans from before Canada was a country to today and tomorrow and the future.
And that's
history every day.
And that's where the conversation is, Elise, whereas the fact that we have to make sure that who sits at the table is knowledgeable, that we have the representation, so that where things are being omitted or not brought to the table, or where the challenges may arise, and those who don't want to hear of those names, there are those people that are there to say that no, it needs to be included, or we have yet to still show representation of this. Right? So it goes back to it's incumbent upon again. So for the Minister Dunlop, where we have to hold her to account to say who has been selected to this committee. To what you asked, what is the criterion? Right? What are the criteria that are required for who is being selected? Is it based on just who is a card carrying individual of your party? Is it just based on who you think you guys like, or is a name, or someone that has a title because they're a, a director or a CEO is why they're being selected? Because that doesn't carry any weight. Right? We need to make sure it's people that steep within the historical context and have advocacy and understand the different avenues as to where we as a people have really put in our input and our work. Ladies, I'll give you each 2 minutes to wrap up, to say what you'd like for people to know, and then we'll be on our way with my closing statements.
So I'm going to toot the horn of the heritage organizations because I belong to one. While we wait for the ministry to get their act together and get us this Black Canadian history education curriculum, there are organizations like ours, Black History Ottawa, across the country, who are able to connect parents, educators, and members of the general public who are just interested in this content with resources. So please use us. And I'm hoping that some of the people around that table you're talking about, Yvette, are going to be people that do this work outside of a school setting and are able to help schools bring living, breathing history into the classroom, because I think experiential learning is very important.
Very good, Elise.
And I am going to toot the museum heritage sites horn. There are numerous ones, including the Amherstburg Freedom Museum in Amherstburg, Ontario, who have volumes of Black history information about people and sites and events that cover the whole spectrum of Black history across this country that are being sidelined again. You know, you can't take your students to museums on tours. Well, they can do that on Zoom now. There's no excuse for not including the sites and the organizations in the Black history spectrum across the entire year. They can be used. That's what we're here for.
Mm-hmm. Very good, ladies. This has been a good conversation. It's short and it's sweet, and there's so much that we still need to be able to discuss and, deconstruct with regards to how we go forward. But here we are on the cusp, hopefully, of being able to push Minister Dunlop and the ministry to be able to develop this roundtable or working group, whichever task force term they're going to use. And we're asking her to be very transparent as to the criterion as to who is being selected and who will be selected, so that if we need to voice anything, it could be voiced appropriately to the channel. Or if it's a matter of people putting names forward, then so be it. But the conversation has to be had, because the curriculum has to be put forward in a far more rich framework, so that people have a clear understanding of the value of what Black Canadians contribute to this country and continue to contribute to this country, and so that we can go forward and elevate the minds of our children, and be able to hold those conversations that we hold dear, to be able to continue to have influence. Because as we know, we are one of the greatest people of group of people on the earth. We are the trendsetters. We are the ones who spend. We need to make sure that we utilize this value and get to the polls. I wouldn't do my due diligence if I didn't say that we know that the federal government will be having the election, but now we may also have a provincial call coming to bear, right? So everyone, please be informed. Again, thank you for taking your time out of your busy day to join us for 100 ABC. We have a series of different conversations that are happening. Please go to the website, look to see where your interest may lie. Continue to join us, and these recordings will go onto the website. So until then, please be well, live good, and support everyone around you. Have a great day.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies, for joining.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. One